And now, here's Mike Muse with the political news.
So let's get right to it and meet the candidates.
That completes the opening statement.
We're going to get right to it.
On Sway in the Morning.
All right, Sway in the Morning, Shay 4-5. You know, it just really alarmed me. My daughter and I were sitting around this weekend, and the gaming industry is actually something I'm invested in more than one way. And when we saw this story that popped up about 2 people being killed, 11 being injured after this shooting during a video game tournament in Jacksonville, Florida, and the police said the suspect in the shooting is a 24-year-old David Cass of Baltimore, who opened fire on gamers before killing himself. They believe that there's a possible motive that he was actually playing and lost the game. There's still the details are still kind of murky, so they're putting it together. And he actually had a laser beam on his gun, and he was picking off players that were in this real close environment. Survivors of the shooting described the scene as absolute chaos. People were running from the area or hiding in bathrooms, calling for help. We know Florida has seen several mass shootings in the past couple of years at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. We did extensive coverage of that. That was at Fort Lauderdale, at the Fort Lauderdale Airport. We done extensive coverage of that. People forget about Post nightclub in Orlando.
Yeah.
We don't even talk about these things. Vegas, and this is interesting because the gaming industry, when it comes to the gun reform and issues that and toxic masculinity, has kind of slid under the radar. People haven't really approached it like how we were talking off the mic, how you brought up, how hip hop is always under scrutiny, always under the spotlight. And what do you do about this? How do you assess this, Mike Muse?
It's interesting, man. As we were talking about off air, I believe that the way the media, the way politics, the political discourse looks at guns and gun violence, hip hop has become such an easy scapegoat because of the lyrics at times. But I've always pushed back on that narrative that it's not just hip hop that talks about violence and where we see gun use. We're seeing now, Sway, on cable television, you see an enormous amount of violence. Now, just on your television set, you see enormous amount of violence when you watch Netflix, Hulu, or any other subscription service that you subscribe to. And now we're seeing it more in the gaming industry. And what's more important about the gaming industry is the amount of time individuals spend on one game. People can spend up to 2, 4, 6, 8 hours, and that's being on the conservative side of this nonstop shooting constantly. So what happens is that becomes this normalized mindset. Now, I'm not saying the gaming industry is at fault for all the shootings that's occurring across our country, but I think it's time that we move beyond the narrative of just placing it on the music business and start focusing it on the overall aspect of why do people have such an obsession with guns. You can't take obsession away because that's a mental thing, if you will, but we have to start looking at our nation is what can we do to prevent the amount of guns that are actually in circulation right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we have to start framing it and become more. But Sway, to do that takes difficult discussions. That takes difficult strategies. That means politicians, you actually have to work. For the first time. And it's so easy just to use one entity as a scapegoat. And so I think this is just a great case is that we have to stop using one entity as a scapegoat and start putting work and doing the work and stop being lazy.
Yeah, and then not blaming the gaming industry. I'm a first generation gamer.
Yep.
And if not one time in my lifetime have I thought about picking up a gun or bringing a gun to a gaming event because of the game. Necessarily.
Is that I don't mean to interject, but is that because the games that we grew up on were so not even realistic? It was like 2D, like blocky characters. Now the realism in the games is so close to reality, the graphics and the visuals and everything. And so to him, he might have been playing a game in his head. If somebody's disturbed, he might be looking at it like, 20 points. I'm not trying to be funny or anything like that, but I'm just saying from his point of view, it could be like, this is just like the game,
It's just so, it was baffling to me is the ease in which somebody is willing to take another person's life and not even think about, the repercussions or that you're going to give or how that affects that person and that person's family.
Well, I think you touched on it. You and Mike Muse, desensitized. We all are. You said we're forgetting about in Orlando, the shooting. We forgot about. We didn't even
Las
touch
Vegas.
on Charleston, South Carolina,
Yeah.
in a church. We didn't touch on the movie theater. It's so many things that it's like this happened. Let's it's over. And we forget about it. He doesn't. This
You see the
young
picture of
man
this man
looks
on the front page of the Daily News here in New York. He looked
crazy, for lack of a better
his
word.
eyes
I'm sorry.
look-
He looks
looks
disturbed.
wired.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's sad. It's tragic.
Absolutely. I'm wondering how the gaming industry is going to react to this, because as I'm hearing everyone, I'm just doing my own personal brainstorm. I feel like maybe they should create some boundaries, where at least how long, like a pop-up will say you've been now playing for 2 hours, and there's some type of restriction thing. You know what I mean? Because now they're doing that for social media. There are some separate apps.
They didn't even cross their mind and have a security system set up. You know what I mean?
I was going to say that, or a vetting process, Tracy Sway, because apparently other gamers have been speaking out and said they've been complaining for years about the lack or the loose security at these gaming events. Apparently they go on all over the place and there's not a lot of security.
I've been to a few of them. There no security. I mean, if you got a badge, if you got ID, you could get your badge and run up in there. I wasn't frisked at any of the events I've gone to. But once again, is it really the video games, or is it the mentality that we have in this country when in relation to guns?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, citizens? 888-742-3345.
Now more of the Daily News on Sway in the Morning.
All right, we're talking about the Florida mass shooting that took place in Jacksonville, Florida. 2 people were killed, 11 were injured, and this is real fresh news, and we're trying to put our heads together on why is this continuing to happen in this country, and where should our energies and focus be placed in this incident. 24-year-old lost a video game. And how about Madden? First
a lot going on with
the Madden game this year. And the 24-year-old killed 2 people and injured 11, and then took his own life. David Katz out of Baltimore. I can only imagine what his family feels like, what the people who were killed families feel like. I can't even imagine it, Mike Muse. How do you assess it again?
This is a notion of our legislators now have to stop passing the buck and stop passing the blame on media entertainment. They have to stop focusing on hip hop. They also too have to stop focusing on the gaming industry and the movie industry and television industry, and really begin to make the difficult conversation, the difficult choices, and the difficult votes on how do we disrupt the amount of distribution of guns that are in circulation currently right now in America. We have one of the highest amounts of guns that are in circulation. We have the highest amounts of deaths associated with guns in America. And it's so easy how people, and now I'm about to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, citizens, but just rock with me for a second. It's so easy how we look at Chicago and see all the things that are happening. And Heather B was mentioning, we don't talk about what's happening in Orlando. We don't talk about what's happening in Las Vegas, but we forget to talk about it. But we also don't even mention Chicago anymore because that's become so normalized, the amount of deaths and shootings that happen weekend after weekend after weekend. And people want to say, well, why isn't the city doing anything about it? But they fail to realize is it's the surrounding states that are around Illinois. Chicago is in the southeast border of Illinois that's surrounded by Indiana and all these other states that have loose gun controls, and how easy a flow it is to go from these other states into Chicago. And that's the reason why Chicago has so many problems, is because of the amount of circulation that is in there. That's part of the problem. It's not the only problem.
But so if you're a gun advocate and say, well, man, it's not the guns, it's the mentality, it's the mental mind state of the people. That's where the problem lies. What does that mean though? Does that mean our society is not informed enough or too immature to really, unless you're a gun expert, to really handle the distribution of guns?
If you notice, Way, in the discourse that we've had just this morning, no one said Americans should not be able to have guns.
Yeah.
No one said Americans cannot be able to use guns. Only thing we're just talking about is how do we become more restrictive on the amount of guns that's in circulation.
Yeah.
And if you're a proud gun owner, I support you, right? My only issue is if you are a law-abiding citizen and you pass all the background checks and you go through the license, you should be able to carry a gun. But the question is, how easy are we making it for those who should not be having a gun because of mental illness or because of other discrepancies in their background?
Or immaturity. This kid, yep, Paul in Knoxville, what are your thoughts?
Well, like you said, it's the mentality. It's not the gun. The gun didn't wake up and say, "Hey, let's go kill people." It's the mentality. People don't respect life anymore, and I think once you change how people feel about life, then that'll make a big difference. It's not the gun. Maybe we need to be educated more on the guns, and maybe there should be, like you have to take your license test every few years, maybe. Every couple of years, people need to go back and be retested on guns and mentally tested to see if they're competent enough to maintain that gun license. But it's just a mentality. If you care about life, you wouldn't do that. And I think we need to change how we feel about it.
Paul, thank you. You're a citizen. I appreciate that.
Sway in the morning.
Megan is in Oklahoma.
Hey, Megan.
Good morning, Megan.
Hey, Megan.
Hey, guys. Good morning. So happy to talk to you guys. So I'm raising two little boys. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And my husband and I were just talking about this the other day. We come at it from both sides of not only how do we fix this problem. First of all, what is the problem? Why are so many predominantly white males going out and mass shooting? But the other side of it is, how do we protect our two little boys, not only from other people, but how do we raise them to not become that? There's obviously a problem out there. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the solution is. But I'm, emotionally, personally invested in this because I've got two little boys that I need to protect, and I don't want them going off to school and getting shot or stabbed or whatever. So, it's a hard question, especially when, the first day of school here in Luther, Oklahoma, there was a kid that stood up and just stabbed another teenage girl in the high school. So really, I think we as a society, we need to figure out what the problem is, what the underlying foundational problem is.
Yeah.
But I'm also a real big advocate. In the meantime, while we figure out what the problem is and fix it, we need to restrict access to these weapons that people are using to commit these crimes.
Yeah. How old are your kids, Megan?
They're 5 and 2.
So you don't really start the conversation necessarily about guns, but you start shaping and molding the mentality about life, I guess, because they're probably too young to understand. But there's a kid that stood up and stabbed a young lady in a classroom. Wow. Yeah, well,
it was a high school. It was at a morning assembly on the very first day of school in one of the cities here in Oklahoma. But you talk about starting the conversation early. There's so much stuff out there, even in cartoons that are meant for kids, that I really have to watch what they watch because they're consuming all of this. All of this media, and just because it's a cartoon doesn't mean that there's not some kind of crazy underlying message on there that I don't want them to hear. My 5-year-old, he's very intelligent, very smart, very observant. We've already had conversations about, you don't use weapons to kill people. You just don't do that. You have to teach them the value of life early, because I feel like that's, like Mike Muse was talking about and you guys were talking about, people are so desensitized because they think this is normal. They see things on TV, they consume all this media, and I feel like the value of life is really just, it's not getting through to a lot of people.
Hey, Megan, thank you for your call, and I love the perspective that you're bringing into it, and you're actually bringing another angle from the aspect of it to what I'm saying is that if we don't figure out the solution quickly and come to grips with what's really happening and stop using this whole notion that guns don't kill people, people kill people, you know what I mean? It's the people's use of the guns. What's going to happen is there are going to be more individuals like Megan, and I'm not saying this is you, Megan, but who are in fear for their own safety. So they feel they need to get out and get a gun to protect themselves from those who actually do have the guns.
Yeah.
So then that increases more guns and then more timidness and more tension that's in our nation. Everyone's starting to pack and carry a gun on that one. The second part of that Megan brought up in terms of the stabbing after school, citizen citizens, something to be mindful of is that Secretary DeVos, our Secretary of Education, is considering using federal funds in order to allocate that for teachers in order to purchase guns, that teachers have guns in the classrooms.
Ridiculous.
So what goes into the situation now is if we don't get to the root of it, we're going to have those moments where just guns are everywhere.
Yeah.
And then what do we do then with that?
Megan, thank you for your perspective. You're a citizen.
Sway in the morning.
I'm Glenn is in Chicago. You want to say something real quick, Glenn? Go ahead.
What up, Glenn?
Yeah, thank you, Sway, for taking my call. Sway, you're not only a legend, you're an institution.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
So what I wanted to say is a big thing that comes up, you said, how can somebody be so quick to just pick up a gun and not value life? But a lot of these people are suicidal. And, it's nothing to them because there are no consequences. There's no repercussions because they're gone after it. They're just going to take as many people with them as they can. So I think that's a big thing that we got to look at. Obviously, not everybody who's suicidal is going to be homicidal. Not everybody who wants to kill themselves is going to kill others. But in so many of these instances where someone picks up a gun and tries to take out as many people as they can, a lot of times they kill themselves at the end. And that was the whole plan all along. They were just going to take out as many people with them.
And that's a good point, Glenn, because we're just seeing suicide is just like such a considerable option to this generation right now. Like, where is that coming from? I mean, that's even a whole nother conversation.
It is
that we can have. You keep pointing to the phone.
It's all the phone. Like I was around some of my younger cousins this weekend, and it's amazing how they value their life based on what they're seeing other people in their age bracket doing from 1 minute videos. It's amazing to me, and I think the phone and what we're doing with it, we can't even have a 5-minute conversation without somebody looking at their phone.
My daughter and I spent the whole weekend together, and just to walk to the store, she forgot her phone, and she's like, "Daddy, I forgot my phone." I said, "That's brilliant. That's beautiful. Let's not take our phones." And she just almost had a nervous attack. Like, I start joking around with her about it, but I did take note that, hey, when we grew up, we didn't have phones, and we communicated differently than how you communicate with your friends. You haven't had one conversation on the phone,
right?
Or everything is texting or DMing or but you haven't had any physical contact with your friends.
I mentioned this last week, Sway. Nokia is doing something called the dumb phone. It's the answer to the smartphone, where they're going back to the flip phones, where you don't have as much information on your phone anymore. You could just make phone calls and that's it.
But I think also, too, with the whole phone conversation, I think when you peel more layers back, what we're not being honest about is the pressure that we're putting on students and kids these days to be great, to be successful, to get into college. The difficulty of getting into college now is 10x than when we were growing up, Sway. And now the difficulty, some of these kids now actually have agendas and schedules at the age of 8, 9, 10 with activities, right?
Yeah,
so
crazy.
The pressure be that, and then the social pressure of the school, and then also, too, the identity pressure. A lot of these students and children have a lot of identity issues that isn't accepted in homes and in communities, right? And so it's a pressure of how do they be their authentic selves, and so there's that dynamic, and then everybody wants to be a billionaire by the age of 21, and so then there's that dynamic and then that pressure, and so there's so many other factors that we're really just not addressing as a nation in terms of what our youth are really wrestling with.
Agree.
Okay, we're gonna take your calls on this, and then we're gonna come back and talk about the Maverick, John McCain, and his passing this weekend and what he meant to this country. And what that means to today's politics. 888-742-3345.
I got a bone. Now more of the daily news on Sway in the Morning.
Senator John McCain will be given an honor bestowed to only 30 people in our nation's history. McCain died of brain cancer over the weekend. Mike Muse, can you kind of put this in perspective, who the Maverick was?
Yeah, man. Senator John McCain, man, got the term Maverick because he was always going against the grain and doing it on his own terms, on his own pace, and how he saw fit. And he wasn't beholden to any entity or philosophy or ideology or any dogma. Senator McCain was a proud naval aviator, citizens you may or may not recall, but he was actually a prisoner of war for the Vietnam War. But then he came back from Vietnam, and if you notice when McCain actually moves his arm, it doesn't really go up all the way.
Yeah.
And that's because he was tortured. And to the extent that he was tortured, he can no longer raise his arms beyond his shoulders. But he came back to fight on, and he became a six-term United States Senator from the state of Arizona. And he also was a 2-time presidential candidate. He died at the age of 81. And his family said that he died at 4:28 p.m. local time on Saturday. And on that Friday, citizens in Sway, you may recall, his family and John McCain made the decision not to do treatments anymore and just to go. And I think that was such a telling moment for America because he's come back from being a prisoner of war. He's come back to be a 6-term United States Senator. He ran for president of the United States 2 times, and yet he came to the end and he said, I'm done fighting, right? And so I think that's when the nation kind of just paused and took a breath, right? When this maverick, this fighter decides to, I'm good, let me go in peace, if you will. What was so interesting, though, Sway, about even in his final days, he was still fighting for the country and he's still fighting for what his belief systems were. He came back after a tough round of treatment to cast the thumbs down vote of the repeal of Obamacare, which is affordable health care. As a result of his vote, the Senate was not allowed to move forward with the dismantling of Obamacare. But on the flip side, he didn't cast a vote for the Republican tax bill, but he weighed in on it, and he said he supported it. And so you see his ideology. You see there's a Democratic viewpoint of the affordable health care and wanted to be made in place, and he sided with that. But then when the tax bill came up, the Democrats didn't want to do this at all, but he believed that this is what he wanted, and he felt it was a good Republican ideology. And he influenced it and said, I'm good with it, and he blessed it. The most memorable moment for me that really captures who Senator John McCain is in the presidential campaign of 2008 when he made this comment.
I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not.
I don't remember this.
No,
ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
Even listening to that, man, I just get emotional when you think about our democracy, right? And you think about where we are now, and literally words matter. And in that moment, Senator McCain was fighting in a fierce battle between him and Obama, and he wanted this so bad. Remember, this is his second time doing it, and he could have went low, and he could have sided with this lady, but he chose to correct the record, and he chose to stand up for principle and said, no, he's not. I disagree with him, but this is not who he is. And there's nothing wrong with being a Muslim. I want to be clear with that. But he didn't allow these false narratives to pursue about someone. And we don't see that enough anymore in any aspect of our election. This has nothing to do with just Donald Trump and his office, but across the board, senators, Republicans. If you remember when Charlottesville occurred, and you saw this rise of neo-Nazis and this white terror, if you will, no Republicans were slow to come out and condemn this. It took like a week for them to come out and condemn it. But if they would have condemned it right on the spot, I honestly, Sway, don't believe that we would see this rise in neo-Nazis as we're seeing it currently right now. And it's for that statement. And it's for that reason, Sway, that Senator McCain has asked President Obama, which is one of his biggest opponents, and also President George W. Bush was also his opponent who he lost to give the eulogy at his funeral. And I think that says something, too. You have a Republican, you have a Democrat speaking on behalf of a senator who is Republican, who's passed away, who lost to both of those gentlemen. And that really speaks to the character of who John McCain is.
I had a chance on the presidential campaign trail of 2007 to go on the trail with, at that time, Senator Obama, Hillary Clinton, Senator McCain, and others that were in the race. And I followed them around the country. We went to numerous spots in different states, and I was just trying to report everything I could. And I got to sit down with this man, right? And when I spoke to him, I even did an article. I don't know what's wrong with MTV. They took the video down. I don't know why that video isn't there. And our conversation started before we even got into policy and politics. I told him I come from a military family. My grandfather served in World War II. My uncle served in the Vietnam War as well. One of my uncles was a scout who used to go out prior to his unit going out into the jungle and scout out routes and see. It was a very dangerous position, and we were able to bond on that level first. And I felt like I even wrote about it that I was talking to an uncle, and it kind of confused me because I had little preconceived notions about what he was about and who he was, and when I walked away from it, all I knew was the man.
Yeah.
And I understood what he said, that he had fundamental differences with at that time Senator Obama. But that didn't define what he thought about him as a person. Yeah. Really easy to have conversation with. And I even said at that time I still had my locks, and he started cracking jokes about me being ugly. No, I'm just joking. They start cracking jokes. We start cracking jokes on each other.
Yeah, and I think his daughter Megan, who was a guest here on the show before, Citizen of Sway in the Morning, I think you having her here sort of extended that. You know, she was very lighthearted. She knew about you. She knew the conversation that you had with her dad. They were able to sit down, it seems, and have conversations with people, differences or not.
But Sway, you mentioned the man.
Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about his politics.
Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about his policy. And I think that's why sometimes the citizens who call up here, it's so difficult for them to understand how I can be so neutral.
Yeah.
This doesn't matter about your ideology. We're unfortunately now in a place and space in our American democracy, and I'm going to call it out. The Republicans have allowed for this to happen by not stopping false narratives at the core. And when you don't stop false narratives at the core, you don't even get a chance to talk about policies.
Yeah.
So we are in a bad state of cultural democracy, which is destroying American civility. And if you notice, I actually got emotional. I was telling this, I don't mind admitting this on air. I was saying this off air to the citizens when the family made that announcement on Friday. I don't even know this man personally. But when they made an announcement that he was going to stop treatment, I actually got choked up because it was a moment that I recognized he was one of the last good ones of civility and decency.
Yeah.
And if he's to be gone, who is left to save our democracy from ourselves?
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with ideology. So you can be Republican and have your differences I may or may not agree with. You can be Democrat and have your policy I may or may not agree with. But at the end of the day, I just want us to be decent human beings and respect each other as humans. And then it makes it better for us to work out the policies and come to a consensus. And that's what the spirit of the two-party system is. I know people are Green Party, Libertarian, all that kind of great stuff too as well. But at the core, the two-party system has been made for checks and balances.
Yeah.
So that I wouldn't want to live in a country where it's ruled by just Democrats. But I also too wouldn't want to exist in a country that's run by Republicans, right? I think that's why when you get the best of one policy, it serves the whole nation.
Thank you, Mike Muse.
Yeah.
And respect to Senator McCain and his service to this country is his entire life. And he will be truly missed, but we'll keep his spirit alive here.
Yeah, we'll still be talking about it more.
Yeah, on Sway in the Morning. Mike Muse, you guys want to continue this conversation, hit him up.
At I am Mike Muse, M-U-S-N-SAM-E on Instagram and Twitter.
We're going to dedicate this song, Hero, to Senator McCain. We got our daily recap with Colin Kaepernick up next. Sway in the Morning.